for up to 3 years, making it difficult for us to see our families, to contact our lawyers, difficult to have charges filed, okay? It's what they did to Jose Padilla. Now, he was not so great, but they can do it to any one of us. Now, what psychiatrists know is that prolonged isolation, solitary confinement, makes healthy, sane people insane. So we're at this kind of incredibly fragile moment because democracies don't close down like that in a kind of steady progressive line. They close down more in what Malcolm Gladwell would call a series of tipping points. And so, and then there reaches a point at which democracy can no longer heal democracy. But that point comes really fast when it comes. So the first time that the state made it legal to torture people, that was one of those vertical lines. And, you know, the first time that this kid was tasered in Florida, I think that was one of those vertical lines. I was not surprised to find that he was tasered at the University of Florida. I know, it's not appropriate for kids. I'm sorry. It's not. I know. I don't let my daughter listen. I don't. It's like she has to watch America's Next Top Model off the record. The daughter of the beauty myth does watch America's Next Top Model, the beauty myth author. But when this kid was tasered, I wasn't surprised to learn, because I was reading Goebbels, that it took place at the University of Florida, which is answerable to the Board of Regents, which is answerable to the state legislature, which has close ties to Jeb Bush. Because Goebbels pioneered this practice of using state legislatures to put pressure on state universities to jeopardize and put pressure on academics and students. But that was one of those vertical lines. And for me, you know, everyone in a closing society has their own boundary at which point they start to shut up. So I'm still talking to you in public, in this public place, and you're still here. I applaud you. For me personally, the day I open the New York Times and read that someone I identify with, an editor, a journalist, has been named an enemy combatant and is in solitary confinement, that's the day I'm not going to be talking to you anymore. Because at that point, I will be too scared. So that's how society closes down. And when these tipping points start to come thick and fast, it happens really quickly. So that is why we should worry about a secret prison system where torture takes place. The third thing that always happens when would-be despots are seeking to close an open society is that they create a paramilitary force.
Look at that, punk. You got a problem?
Oh my God. Oh my God. You just...
And they just keep on rolling. Gee, I wonder why the Iraqis didn't like us. I can't quite figure it out. Maybe it was our enormous disregard for their lives. Like we didn't give a damn. As we pretended that we were there to give them freedom and democracy. Let's take a look at freedom one more time.
Oh my God. Oh my God. You just...
And what do you say to that? Who is that? That's right. That's exactly right. Now, you know, really think about it. You can't close down a democracy without a paramilitary force. You can't, because people are like, you know, I'm not going to be pushed around by you. But once you have a paramilitary force, you can send that paramilitary force to intimidate civilians. And then it doesn't matter if you've still got the, essential institutions of civil society functioning, because people are really just too intimidated to push back. This is what happened. Like, people forget Italy was a democracy, a working parliamentary democracy, when Mussolini started to send what he called Arditi black shirts, paramilitary guys, out to scare and intimidate civilians. Last summer in the Portland airport, people were asked by TSA officials, Transportation Security Administration officials, to drink baby formula and even human breast milk. Remember that? After the scare about the guy who was carrying liquids onto the plane. So this was a familiar scene to me. This was one of those echoes, because Mussolini, the black shirts forced civilians to drink emetics, like laxatives, at gunpoint, and this was so intimidating, it worked so well that Hitler imitated it, and the brown shirts forced people to drink gross liquids, and this is a new scene for America, armed agents forcing people to drink gross liquids at gunpoint. But when you look at Germany too, they weren't a majority party when the brown shirts were sent to intimidate civilians, to bully people, beat people. So right now, and by the way, the founders, like, why do we have the Second Amendment? Gosh, no, it just makes me crazy. This is what makes me crazy. We're in an era when ordinary people feel separated from the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. I did. I have a good education, and I had to, sit a lawyer friend down. I mean, literally sit a lawyer friend down and say, okay, you have to explain to me what due process means. What is due process, beginning to end? Because what is due process? Who knows exactly what due process is? And we're all really well educated.
Notice and opportunity.
Pardon me?
Notice and opportunity.
Notice and opportunity, that's right. So we're in a time when, this professional class of pundits and politicians and constitutional scholars are tasked themselves with worrying about the Constitution, worrying about liberty. And we're told, don't worry about it. It's not your business. So I didn't even know how the Second Amendment worked or why it protected me until I did this reading. And the founders knew the danger that a paramilitary force poses to civilians, because King George's men were wandering around bullying colonists, breaking into their homes. This is why a blanket warrant is such a big deal. They would have a blanket warrant, just say, okay, fine, I can break into your home, take your stuff, the way the state took Brandon Mayfield's computer out of his home in Oregon, a yuppie, like any of us. And I say that in quotation marks, but he was like a total mainstream American, innocent guy. They broke into his home, went through his kids' stuff, took his stuff. And the founders knew, that these mercenaries were harassing women, molesting women, scaring and intimidating civilians. So they said, you can't have a standing army that's not answerable to the people. So Blackwater is now in the news. It has close ties to the White House. And Blackwater is in the news right now in Iraq for massacring 17 civilians 2 or 3 weeks ago. And they got a slap on the wrist. But what most Americans don't know is that Blackwater is already operating on Main Street, USA. They were invited by the Department of Homeland Security to patrol the streets of New Orleans in the wake of Katrina. And they just got a $1 billion contract to work more intimately in the United States. Their business plan calls for increased deployment in America in the event of a natural disaster or a public emergency. And the Defense Authorization Act of 2007 makes it easier for the president, on his say-so alone, to declare a public emergency, because he says there's a public emergency.
To unleash the full power of the federal government in this effort today, I am officially declaring a national emergency. 2 very big words.
Not only that, but a new law has made it easier for the president to declare martial law by federalizing the National Guard. Now, the National Guard is supposed to be answerable to the people, to governors, right? The president can now take the National Guard of Alabama and send them here to Washington State and deploy them to enact curfew and martial law here in Washington State over the objections of the governors of Alabama and Washington State and not tell Congress about it till after the fact. So this is exactly what the founders were trying to go, no, no, you can't do this. This is a catastrophe. The fourth thing, and then I'll just zip ahead because these are, hard to absorb. The fourth thing that a would-be dictator always does is to create a surveillance apparatus aimed at ordinary citizens. Now, it doesn't take much for this kind of surveillance apparatus to be effective. In East Germany, everyone thought they had a Stasi file, but only 10% of the people actually did turn out to have a Stasi file. You don't need to surveil everyone in order, if everyone thinks they're being surveilled, that's inhibiting. Why is this so, personally freaking out to me, this surveillance? And by the way, this is driven by a profit motive. America isn't driven by ideologies the way that Italy or Germany were. But America is driven by profit very often. And it's quite extraordinary. When the Berlin Wall fell, the third of the US economy that is defense manufacturing was facing a declining market share because we lost our global enemy. And what do you have to do if you're losing a global enemy and you're the defense industry? Make a new enemy, exactly. They were looking at a real economic catastrophe unless they could hype a new enemy, enter the global war on terror. And what happened was that these weapons manufacturers who used to make Cold War weapons shifted their manufacturing to what's called the security industrial complex technologies, surveillance and security. And they have lobbyists, and their lobbyists work closely with Homeland Security. And it's this, again, multi-billion-dollar industry. And so the best way to make sure that you're going to have continued profits is not just to hype a relatively minor enemy, serious but minor, the way that England and Spain sees the terror threat as serious but not a global war, right? Gordon Brown has said it's a crime, not a cause. It's not a global war. The way you make sure to generate profit is to be sure that the enemy you create is us, that we are the enemy in need of surveillance. So why is this so personal for me? For about a year and a half, every time I got on a plane, are you guys okay? Yeah. No, I always ask this at this point in the talk because, it's a lot. But I do admire Americans because they're like, we can handle it. No, seriously. I sometimes feel overwhelmed by this stuff. I often do. Well, for a year and a half, every time I got on a plane, I would get a quadruple S, high-risk security threat symbol on my boarding pass. Now, I'm a short Jewish girl from New York. And in what way do I fit a global terrorist profile? The short Jewish girls with their credit cards rampaging through the globe, the big threat. But I was always taken aside and given extra searching, and I kept asking, why are you doing this? Why? Finally, a nice young woman from the TSA said, you're on the list. And I'm like, the list? I'm on the list? And her supervisor sort of hustled her away. And I did some research, I reported it out, and I was in very good company. Richard Murphy, the nation's foremost constitutional scholar, who had just given a speech, he's a Princeton scholar, critical of Bush's assault on the Constitution, was on the list. Two nice little old ladies from San Francisco who run an anti-war newsletter called War Times are on the list. I just heard that one of the leaders of Code Pink, the anti-war group, was turned back from Canada. She was not allowed to cross the border, which is a classic fascist tactic of closing borders to critics and dissidents. She's on the list.
If you haven't watched part 1 and 2 yet, I suggest you do that. Then come back to my page for part 4. Peace.